Extreme intoxication, hardcore revenge, and a frankly alarming amount of cannibalism. How in the world did we miss these twisted tales? Stay tuned to learn more about Greek mythology stories they skipped in school. This story starts with a king, Tereus of Thrace, marrying a princess, Procne of Athens. Seems standard enough, right? Well, things start going sideways when Procne, desperately missing her beloved sister Philomela, brings her to live with them in Thrace. Tereus starts to lust after his sister-in-law, ultimately taking her into the nearby woods to have his way with her. Philomela threatens to tell her sister, and Tereus responds by holding her captive in a cabin, cutting out her tongue, and sexually assaulting her again. But that's nowhere near the end of the tragedy. Philomela knows she needs to get word to Procne, so she weaves a tapestry that explains the whole event. When Procne receives the tapestry, she rescues her sister and they plot revenge. First, they kill and dismember Idas, the son of Tereus and Procne. The pieces of his body are made into a stew, which is then served to Tereus for dinner. At the end of the meal, Tereus asks to see their son. Procne responds that Idas is in his stomach, and that's when Philomela walks into the room, carrying the boy's severed head. Finally, the gods intervene. Philomela is turned into a nightingale, restoring her voice. Procne is turned into a swallow. But Tereus, he becomes a hopo, a bird that wears a beautiful crown but is completely unable to sing. Dionysus. He's the fun god, right? Everyone knows he's the god of wine, inspiring extravagant parties and general madness around ancient Greece.
Oh man, sorry I'm late. Orgy stuff. I had like 10 orgies.
Great. Well, we should probably be thankful that those caught on to mask the stories about his horrible birth. Like many Greek myths, this story has a couple of different versions. Dionysus was associated with the figure Zagreus in the Orphic version of mythology. This is where the first version comes in. Zagreus was born from a union between Persephone and Zeus, who was weirdly in snake form at the time. The ever-jealous Hera convinced the Titans to not only tear the baby into pieces, but to eat him. They ate everything except his heart. Athena took Zagreus' heart, turned it into a drink, and gave it to Semele. She then hooked up with Zeus again and bore Dionysus, who was formed in part around the heart of Zagreus. Another different version adds a bizarre epilogue. In this version, Hera turns her sights on Semele. Hera whispers to her that she really should ask her lover to prove that he was divine. Zeus agrees, but the mortal Semele was overwhelmed by his divine self and was promptly fried by thunderbolts. All that remained of her was the fetal Dionysus, who Zeus picked up, sewed into his leg, and kept there until he was ready to be born. Tantalus was an insanely rich but incredible evil king of Sepilus. His father was Zeus, and his mother was the daughter of a pair of titans. So, when you think about it, maybe genetics had something to do with it. Tantalus was afforded certain privileges, like entrance to Mount Olympus, where he joined the gods for their meals. There are 3 different stories about what happened next, but they all agree that he screwed up big time. In the first, he at least told his fellow mortals what the gods had in store for them. In another, however, he stole some of the gods' food, ambrosia and nectar, to pass on to the same mortals. He is always punished for testing the boundaries between god and mortal. But the third story really shows the extent of his mania. Tantalus wanted to know if the gods really did know all, so he decided he was going to kill his son, Pelops, and cook him up for dinner, because that's the best way to prove a point, right? He served the gods a special stew, and no one ate it. No one except Demeter. Demeter at the time was distracted in mourning the loss of her daughter to the underworld and its ruler.
How are things in the underworld?
Well, they're just fine. A little dark, a little gloomy, and as always, hey, full of dead people.
As punishment, Zeus condemned Tantalus to eternal hunger and thirst. He was forced to stand in a pool of water that drained when he tried to drink, and to lay beneath a tree with fruit that hung just outside of his reach. Zeus was a weird guy. Most of us probably learned in school that the gods and the giants clashed in a massive war. The gods won, but what happened to some of the specific giants was possibly glossed over a bit. Take Porphyrion. He was the king of the giants of Pellene, and he met his end with kind of a double whammy. He was hit with arrows and lightning from Heracles and Zeus, respectively. He went down on the battlefield, but despite his injuries, still had a mind for evil. Some sources say that he had his eye on Hera and intended to violate Zeus's queen in the most horrible of ways. Other sources say that he so fiercely desired Hera because Zeus made him lust after her. Just let that sink in for a moment. Zeus turned one of their enemies into a raging lust monster, sent him after his wife, then swooped in to save the day. Does that sound fishy to anyone else?
Do you think maybe he's compensating for something?
The story of the Minotaur, where Theseus slays the beast and plays the hero, is a pretty common myth. We also tend to hear about Troy, where the beautiful Helen is the center of the massive war. But what we don't often learn about is the terrible way that these two stories actually overlap. Theseus, not a nice guy. According to one story, he was already the king of Athens when he made a bro pact with his buddy Perithous. Each one was going to pick a daughter of Zeus, abduct her, and then defile her. Theseus heard of Helen's beauty and chose her, even though at the time she was still a teenager. Of course, that didn't stop him from going through with it. The assault produced a daughter named Iphigenia. That name should sound vaguely familiar to anyone with a passing familiarity with the story of Troy. When the Greek fleet was halted by calm waters, Agamemnon sacrificed his daughter Iphigenia to Artemis in hopes of returning the winds so they could continue sailing to war. But Iphigenia wasn't really his daughter. Agamemnon and his wife had adopted her after Helen gave birth to her to help preserve Helen's reputation. According to one tale, Theseus was making his way through the Parnes Mountains when he was approached by a kind stranger. The stranger invited him into his home for dinner and a nap. When he accepted, and when he sat down outside to wait for his room, he was approached by a young girl. The girl warned him. Men call him Procrustes, or the Stretcher. No one who comes into his house ever goes out again. When Theseus asked why he was called the Stretcher, she replied that it was because he boasted that his iron bed would perfectly fit all who lie in it, and it would. If they're too short, he'd stretch them, and if they're too tall, he'd lop off their legs. Procrustes returned, and Theseus followed him into his room. There he saw the axes and the pulleys and the blood-stained floor, and confronted Procrustes. Procrustes admitted that it was all true, and Theseus, he threw the man into his own trap and left him there to die. Erysichthon was a Thessalian king who forgot the crucial rule number one of ancient Greek life: respect the gods. When he decided he needed a banquet hall, he headed out into a nearby forest, a forest that just happened to be sacred to Demeter. He knew, but he didn't care. When he got to a sacred poplar tree in the middle of the grove, one that was sacred not only to Demeter, but to the nymphs as well, the tree cried out in pain. Hearing the cry, Demeter came to walk the earth. She condemned Erysichthon for his thoughtless disrespect and told him to go ahead, build his banquet hall because he was going to need it. So he built it, and he feasted, but he was still hungry. The more he ate and drank, the hungrier he became. He ate entire cows, he ate vermin, he ate the bits destined for the garbage, and still he was hungry. He spent his entire fortune on food, even selling his daughter into slavery, until he was bankrupt and begging for scraps.
It just occurred to me, I've never seen a room full of rich people so hungry before.
After exhausting his resources, he started to eat himself, and ate more and more of his own flesh until he very literally ate himself to death. Who said Eve found the most forbidden fruit? Aw, Pan. Isn't he cute? He's the god of hunters and shepherds, the one that lives out in the farthest reaches of the fields and the mountains. He's half man and half goat. He's almost always portrayed as holding his panpipes and playing music, but these images might not be as whimsical as they seem. The story behind just where the pan flute came from is pretty stalkery. The legend says that Pan fell in love with a nymph named Syrinx who wanted nothing to do with him. He continued to pursue her until she felt she had no other option but to call on the gods for help. Well, then when it comes to asking the gods, their idea of help can sometimes leave a heck of a lot to be desired. Instead of telling Pan to go find someone else to pester, they turned the nymph, who was standing alongside the river Ladon, into reeds. Pan was all kinds of sad until he heard the wind whistling through the reeds, the remains of his true love. So what's a lovesick god to do? He cut down the reeds, lashed them together, and named his new instrument Syrinx. Most are familiar with the Minotaur, the bull-headed creature that lives in the labyrinth. Sure, he was just some kind of creation made by the gods, right? Nope. The creature's origin starts with a deal with Poseidon. Minos wanted to prove that he not only had the favor of the gods, but also that he should be king of Crete. His plan? Asked Poseidon to send him a bull from the sea. Minos promised that he would sacrifice the bull once it was on land, but it was such a magnificent creature that he sacrificed another and sent Poseidon's bull to his own herd of cattle. This didn't go over well, and as payback, Poseidon cursed Minos' wife, Pasiphae, to lust after the bull. She didn't just lust after it, though. She even went so far as going to the inventor Daedalus and asked him to build her a giant wooden cow. What was the cow for? Well, she could climb inside and get all frisky with the bull if she wanted. She did, and the union produced the bull-headed Minotaur. You could definitely argue that the whole thing was Minos' fault, so here's a bit of karma. Pasiphae, who was the immortal daughter of the sun god Helios, got sick of Minos and his affairs, so Pasiphae cursed him to spread not his seed, but snakes and scorpions that would invariably kill the women he seduced. Dionysus might be the god of wine, but he's also the god of things like madness, so it might seem like common sense to avoid messing with him. Bad things can happen. And for Pentheus, a king of Thebes, these consequences were swift and harsh. When the cult of Dionysus passed through his city, Pentheus called it an evil that needed to end. Needless to say, Dionysus wasn't a fan of that particular statement. He was dressed as one of his own priests when Pentheus arrested him. According to Dionysus, if the priest were to see his god, he would need to bring him down to where Pentheus could stone him to death. Bad idea. Dionysus escaped and convinced Pentheus to see what was really going on at the mad dancing parties his followers were holding. So he did. There, he ran into his own mother, who started the party by ripping his arm right out of the socket. It just went downhill from there. The dancers, led by Pentheus' mother and aunt, ripped him to pieces. They tossed the bloody bits around the group and finally mounted his head on a stick before continuing their dark, mad dance. Artemis was the virgin goddess of the hunt, and as such, she guarded her virginity very, very carefully. So, depending on the story, you might argue that the Theban hero Actaeon kinda had it coming. Why? Well, he decided to spy on the goddess as she bathed. Some stories say that he only accidentally caught a glimpse of her as she was bathing, while others say he peeked on purpose. In true Olympian justice fashion, he was turned into a deer and ripped apart by his own hunting dogs.
Had I the power some say Dian had, thy temple should be planted presently with horns, as was Actaeon's.
Here's the super sad part. Some versions give Actaeon's hounds the main stage, some even going so far as to name them all. It's said that when Artemis's influence over the pack disappeared, the dogs realized what they had done to their owner. Their howls of grief echoed across the land until Charon, who had trained Actaeon to hunt, made a likeness of their master that made their grief manageable. Zeus had a ton of affairs and a ton of illegitimate children. The women who fell under his lustful gaze often got caught between him and his ever-jealous, long-suffering wife in terrible ways. Take Lamia, for example. She was the daughter of Poseidon and a queen of Libya when she caught Zeus's eye. Lamia was maddeningly beautiful, that is, until Hera got involved. There are a few different versions of Hera's revenge, but she's always said to have either stolen or murdered Lamia's children. The loss of her children drove Lamia mad with grief, so much grief, in fact, that she gouged out her own eyes. And here's where things get dark. Zeus turned her into a monster, usually described as sort of a woman with snake-like features. From a beautiful queen to a murderous, monstrous creature, Lamia became widely known as a nightmarish horror.